Thanks for joining me on this journey of joy, grief, and authenticity. My name is Hilarie Houghton, and in today's episode, I want to talk about the best advice I've ever been given. When my husband and I lost our daughter, Hollis, at 6 days old, I had a colleague come up to the hospital and talk with us. He's a doctor. He talked a lot about what we could expect in the coming days and how hard it was going to be when she did pass, because she had a fatal genetic disorder and severe brain damage that was irreversible. As a pediatrician, he had seen these types of instances a lot, and so he had walked through a lot of families through similar situations, and it was really reassuring to hear him tell us some of the best advice we'd ever heard, and we put it to use immediately. He really encouraged us to build up a supply of forgiveness and get ready to hand it out to people. He told us that, people are oftentimes going to say a lot of things that are unhelpful or hurtful. And it comes from a place of innocence, and they just don't know what to say. We could go ahead and prepare ourselves for that by building up in our minds the idea that we're going to forgive them right now before it even happens. I found over time I began to visualize this very specific image in my head every time I thought about this piece of advice. I would think about a big red barn out in the country, beautiful landscape, and it would be this old big red barn with white trim and a big rolling barn door. And every time someone would say something to me that wasn't maybe as helpful as I thought it could be, or I didn't agree with, or maybe it wasn't biblical and it hurt to hear, I would go to that place in my mind and I would roll open that big barn door. And sometimes it took a lot of effort to open the door to forgiveness, but I would open up that door and start doling out forgiveness just like it was bales of hay, and I would pass it out to that person. It always comforted me to know that that big red barn was there, and whenever somebody said something that just hurt a little bit, I would go to that place with the big red barn and I would start opening up that door. My husband and I still say that this is the best advice that we were given throughout the whole situation, and it's really applicable to all parts of life, and I found myself using it all the time. And as a Christian, we should. The Bible tells us a lot about forgiveness. It says, be kind to each other and tenderhearted and forgiving one another as Christ forgave us. And it also talks about Jesus advising that, no, you shouldn't just forgive someone 7 times. Forgive them 7 times 7. Forgive them many, many times. And I like to think about that as an example of just plan on forgiving them for everything over and over again. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this is a very biblical truth. It's a very biblical piece of advice. The Bible tells us that we should be kind to one another and tenderhearted and forgive each other just as God forgave us. It also says, and I want to read this correctly, it says that Peter came up to Jesus and he asked him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I have to forgive him? As many as 7 times? Do I have to do it 7 times? And the Lord said, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. And that to me just reiterates that really, in reality, God wants us to forgive endlessly. And that's something to also keep in your mind, and always continue to forgive someone over and over, as many times as it may require. At the end of the day, nobody knows how to handle grief, and everyone grieves so differently. So it makes sense that we have to forgive one another. We have to forgive one another that they may have to do something in a way that's different than we would do it. And it's not personal, it's not hurtful. I like to remind myself that people have the best intentions. I really believe that. And so if you keep that in mind, it makes it so much easier to forgive someone too, because oftentimes they don't quite know what the best thing to do is anyway, and there's not exactly a book for this. Although I have done an episode on grief books that are pretty helpful, but at the same time, everyone grieves so differently, so you never know how one person is going to be grieving and what would be helpful for them. So keep these things in mind if you find yourself dealing with grief, or someone you know and love is dealing with grief. I find that it has been some of the best advice that I have ever received.